but there's systemic or whole body inflammation that is the undercurrent or the driver of the vast majority of chronic illnesses that we tend to experience in the United States and in industrialized countries. And that's really the key in terms of targeting for cardiac disease.
Welcome to Mama Mabel's Caregivers podcast, where we shine a light on the real stories, challenges, and triumphs of caregiving. Today's episode is titled How to Care for a Loved One with Heart Disease, a Cardiologist Guide for Caregivers. Heart disease remains one of the leading causes of death worldwide, yet many caregivers find themselves suddenly responsible for helping a loved one navigate a heart attack, heart failure, valve disease, or serious cardiac conditions, often without knowing where to begin. Joining us today is Dr. Bilal Ahmed, a practicing interventional and structural cardiologist who specializes in opening blocked arteries during heart attacks and repairing or replacing damaged heart valves. He's also the co-founder of Lylah Health and is known for his straightforward approach to medicine, operating under a simple philosophy: no BS ever. In this conversation, we'll explore what caregivers need to know about heart disease, how to support a loved one through diagnosis and treatment, practical ways to improve heart health through lifestyle and nutrition, and the steps family can take to advocate with confidence. If you love someone living with heart disease or want to protect your own heart health, this is an episode you do not want to miss. Let's get into it. Well, hello, Dr. Bilal Ahmed. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you? Thanks for asking.
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you for asking as well. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a guest on Mama Mabel's Caregivers podcast. Podcast family, you know what I usually say. This is going to be a dynamic episode. We have the cardiologist here today to talk with us about heart health. So the name of this episode is How to Care for a Loved One with Heart Disease, a Cardiologist Guide for Caregivers. And this is with Dr. Bilal Ahmed. So everyone, get ready. We're about to dive into this. It's going to be a great episode. So with that said, let's get right into it. Dr. Bilal Ahmed, please tell me about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an interventional and structural cardiologist. What that means is I open up arteries during heart attacks, and then I repair and replace valves depending on the disease state and what valve it is. I'm also an entrepreneur, so I'm a co-founder and chief scientific officer of a company called Lylah Health, which is a company essentially targeting what we call residual risk in cardiology. So of all the medical specialties, cardiology, because it's the number one killer in the United States and globally, has the most research behind it. So we have really good or fine-tuned predictive tools in terms of telling, plugging and chugging a few variables and then estimating what somebody's risk of developing heart disease in the next 10 years and over a lifetime is. But despite those advances, there is a massive gap or a residual risk between what we predict and then how many people and who actually develops heart disease. And by and large, the community, meaning cardiologists, agree that it's somewhere, that residual risk lies somewhere in the inflammatory pathway. So most people have heard about inflammation. It's a very nebulous and broad term, but inflammation can be from a number of sources. It can be localized. I hit my elbow on the door and I have inflammation there. My immune cells are kind of going to that area to heal, a tendon injury or something like that. But there's systemic or whole body inflammation that is the undercurrent or the driver of the vast majority of chronic illnesses that we tend to experience in the United States and in industrialized countries. And that's really the key in terms of targeting for cardiac disease. Long-winded way to say that that's been my research interest and my personal passion throughout my life.
No one plans to become a caregiver. One day, life changes, and suddenly you're managing appointments, medications, emergencies, and trying not to lose yourself in the process. That's why I created Mama Mabel's Caregiver Resources. From emergency planning tools and caregiver organization systems to my 90-day caregiver self care journal with daily wellness reflections and nourishing juicing recipes, these resources were created to support the person behind the caregiving. Because caring for someone you love shouldn't mean forgetting yourself. Scan the QR code on this video or click the link in the description below to explore the resources created for caregivers by a caregiver. You don't have to carry it all alone.
So back in 2017, with a few colleagues, when I was up at Brown University in Providence, I started a prospective study. We started a prospective study, meaning looking into the future, enrolling patients who were getting procedures called a left heart catheterization, which is a procedure to take a look at the arteries of the heart, see if there's any blockage. We had two groups: people who had blockage, needed a stent, or needed it popped open, and people who had no blockage, basically no disease. And I was looking at the interplay between the gut microbiome, which most people have probably heard by this point, but usually in a marketing kind of term or scenario. But looking at the vast amounts of bacteria that reside with us in our body, mostly in our gut, or they're most densely populating the gut. And the way we would analyze that is with a rectal swab, because it's part of the gut, and then do what's called 16S sequencing, basically ribosomal or protein sequencing, to see what type of bacteria grew and in what diversity, and something called metabolomics, basically what chemicals do those bacteria have and what consequences does that have in terms of different organ systems and disease states, specifically cardiology here. That became a passion that came this close to fruition, in the sense that we were three patients shy of enrolling the entirety of our cohort, and then a once in a lifetime pandemic hit, and appropriately we'll let it pass. Funding went away because it got diverted to something that was more necessary. Despite that, it remained a passion, not only up here, but so, for example, in my cardiology training, or my general cardiology training, which was 3 years, we would go in front of the entire cardiology division and give an hour-long talk once a year about a passion of ours. In all 3 years, I gave a talk that was titled The Inflammatory Hypothesis of Cardiac Disease, Part 1, 2, and 3. And I kicked off the third year, my final year, talking about the gut microbiome and where that plays in terms of addressing that residual risk I talked about in the inflammatory burden. And just, sorry, a little bit more long-winded than I thought, but the lead up to this, for people who are interested and want to look it up, is back in 2008, there was a trial called the Jupiter trial, looking at people who had normal cholesterol levels, but levels of inflammation that were too high. So a lab test called high sensitivity CRP that was above 2. And they gave them a type of cholesterol medication that also has anti-inflammatory properties called rosuvastatin. And stroke, heart disease related death, and heart attack were decreased or prevented by 50% in that large cohort of patients. And there have been multiple trials looking at addressing inflammation and how it reduces the risk of heart disease: Colcott, Lodoco, Cantos, for anyone who's interested in looking up the data.
Wow, that's very interesting. I never thought about inflammation as perhaps being the source in part. What I know about inflammation from a holistic standpoint is the fact that the type of foods we eat can affect the levels of inflammation within the body. Was that a part of that as well?
Absolutely. Inflammation is, again, a very broad term, but the sources, you're right, a lot of it is environmental. It's lifestyle and lifestyle related, and it's stuff that we can't escape, or it's very hard and costs a lot personally to escape it. So, for example, this is where food deserts and the cost of healthy eating ties in. You take the average American diet, and it's got some fast food in it that's inflammatory by nature. A lot of processed foods, cured meats like deli meat, for example, you eat a sandwich from the deli, that is pro inflammatory in the sense that to preserve that deli meat or cure it, they have to use chemicals that are by nature pro inflammatory. To get into one aspect of the caregiving conversation we'll have later, in the Corn Belt, the pesticides that are used and approved are known and are listed as pro-inflammatory and pro-carcinogenic, meaning they're known to promote cancer to some degree. So basically, we live in an environment where food that is healthy is more expensive than food that's not. The food that's not healthy is not healthy because it's inducing systemic inflammation. And then there are a bunch of other factors like microplastics that we don't even know the downstream effects of because it's pretty recently recognized. And you go all the way down to sedentary lifestyles, which we're forced into. A lot of us have desk jobs. But yeah, there's a whole host of things, a lot of them environmental, like you were saying.
Wow, that really resonates with me. There's so much to what you said, there's so much value in what you have stated. One of the reasons why it really resonates with me is because personally, congestive heart runs in my family. It's
Mhm.
hereditary. In addition to that, I've also lost a best friend of mine 2 years ago. His name was Courtney Daniels. I like to dedicate this episode to him specifically and in his memory. And then also, I have various loved ones and friends who have heart conditions. And everything that you're saying, it's really interesting how, in part, we're affected by our environment. Like, I think about even the fact how challenging sometimes whole foods, you're able to find that in comparison to the fast foods that we have and all of the chemicals and ingredients that's in the foods that we eat that causes inflammation, the seed oils. I could go on and on. Let me ask you this question as pertains to the heart, to the type of blood that we have. Do you think that plays a part whether you're AB positive or O negative, etc.?
I think it may play a minor part, but there's no data that I'm aware of that is strong enough to say for sure that your blood type dictates your risk of disease, to be quite frank.
Okay, okay, that's interesting. And thank you for that because I know I've had questions that have come up about that in eating based upon your blood type and etc. and if that helps with the heart. So thank you for that information. As it pertains to your experience of being a caregiver and helping in that capacity, I like to talk about your experience with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see it a lot in my professional life, and it's sobering to be on the other side. I'm thankful and blessed in the sense that this didn't happen to me personally, but it happened to a trio of kids essentially that are very close to me. And I've gotten permission from them. I won't mention names, but they know that I talk about this in these kind of circumstances. But my wife's uncle was very close to her to the extent that they lived under one roof for many years. And he lived in the Midwest in the Corn Belt and has or had, however you want to say it, three kids in their 20s. And last year, he had these very vague GI symptoms, went and sought care, and to make a long story short, was diagnosed with end stage pancreatic cancer, which is a death sentence. It has weeks to go. It was extremely challenging as a non provider in that circumstance to guide the family because it was really my wife and I, she's a physician as well, who were really the only doctors in the family. And the care team was not addressing a number of things, starting with his pain or his symptoms. They were not prioritized. What I mean by that is they're coming in at 5 o'clock. It's like a 2 to 5 minute rounds. He's not awake enough to tell them that he's in pain, but the rest of the day he's in pain. The family tells the providers or tells the nurse rather, who's an intermediary between the providers and the family that, hey, he's in pain all day long. So like what you're doing is not working. And they're like, we saw him in the morning and he didn't seem like he was in pain. It's like he was sleeping. There's a little bit of common sense missing there. And then to make matters worse, they would not discuss the prognosis in any way that would prepare those three kids and his wife for what was going to happen inevitably. So my wife and I found ourselves basically having what's called a goals of care discussion with the kids. I vividly remember taking the eldest aside and basically telling it to her straight and being like, look, your dad is going to die. You're going to have to make decisions that you probably never anticipated having to make, that I'm not envious of, but you're going to have to make them. Do you want him to get CPR at the end of his life with a terminal diagnosis where CPR is not going to do anything but buy him days? CPR is meant to compress the heart from outside. So you have to push 2 inches minimum. So ribs are cracked. It's very brutal and morbid and not something you want to see. And immediately she's tasked with making these very adult, very terrifying decisions. And she is a superwoman. Took it in stride, brought in her 2 younger siblings, and basically got the job done. Not to belabor this point too much, I'm sure we'll unpack it and I'll talk about all the terrible things that happened. But unfortunately, he passed almost a month, a little less than a month after his diagnosis. And as statistically unlikely as it is, he was the breadwinner of the family, by the way, which makes it worse. His wife was a homemaker, which is important, but obviously doesn't put food on the table. She got diagnosed about 3 months later with end stage gastric cancer and passed about 5 weeks after that. So they went through it again. And this time they were prepared, which no one should have to be in their 20s. But now they, instead of in the Corn Belt, they live 15 minutes down the road. They relocated to be close with us, and we're going on a trip this afternoon. But yeah, it was very sobering as a clinician being involved emotionally, because you have to extract yourself from that emotional side when you're doing it in the hospital as a provider.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story, your family story, and your experience. Everything you mentioned is very deep and profound. And when you have a loved one that does have, for an example, cancer, my mother had breast cancer, right? And I've shared this story and I'll just high level share it again. My mother kept getting blood clots in her lungs back for over like a 10-year period from 2007. That was the first time to ultimately 2017. In November of 2016, she was in a hospital and they said, well, Mable, you keep getting these blood clots, so let's do some more tests. Found out she had breast cancer, then found out it was stage 4. And so, to your point, my world was spinning and not really getting all of the information that I needed. But then later on, I retired her out, moved her down south with me. I got a house built for her. That was my gift to her. But while that was being built, I had her in my apartment and I had nurses, I had CNAs. And we went through that process as well of if something happens, do you want to be resuscitated? Do you want this? Do you want that? So having to experience that. And then to your point, the day she passed, she literally said, hours prior, she said, I thought about it. And if something happens to me, I want you to resuscitate me because I want to be here. So we took the road of the CPR. And I resonate with that, y'all. Podcast family, it's a very hard thing because ribs are cracked. Thinking about it just brings tears to my eyes.
Yeah.
So
Is that why your podcast is called what it's called?
it's
Yeah,
named
that's a
after my beloved mother.
beautiful tribute to her.
Thank
I'm so
you.
sorry.
Thank you. Her name was Mable and Mama Mable. We called her Mama Mable. With that said, if you have a loved one that is terminally ill, it is very important for you to know what's going on. And the fact, Bilal, that you were able to really just talk to them and let them know and be straightforward with them about where their father was at, what was going to happen, the steps that they would need to take to help just prepare them. It was great of you. It can be hard when you're definitely in your 20s. I was in my early 30s. So, again, I resonate with that. And thank you for sharing that with the podcast family. You are a cardiologist. I want to talk more about that and where you're currently located and what you focus on. And also, what do you notice about area that you're in terms of patients? Do you feel that they're being underserved? Do you feel that they're aware? Are there any helpful tips that you
Yeah,
can?
absolutely. So I live in a suburb of Atlanta, but I practice in Columbus, Georgia. So at all 3 hospitals in Columbus, Georgia, I'm part of a practice called the Chokar Clinic. And for a little bit of kind of background, I grew up in Alabama. My parents are still in Alabama. And then I did all my training in the Northeast. My wife also grew up in Alabama, and we felt a connection to this area and wanted to come back, or always intended to come back. So we came as close as we could to Alabama, to Georgia, because my wife is high risk OB, and without getting you know, down that political road. She cannot practice high risk OB or perform any abortions, even if it's at risk of mom's life in Alabama. So we came as close as we could. And the population is much more heavily skewed towards the Black population than in New England. That's just by virtue of what the South is like. And I really wish my wife had more of an online presence, because she gets on her soapbox and does it a lot better than I do. But one thing, sorry about that. One thing that I notice is really the lack of providers, one, and then the lack of kind of attention that the community around us gets. I'll give you, and also kind of the dynamic. I'll try to keep this as short as possible, but the one of the most striking examples.
Bilal, you don't have to keep it short. Please take your time.
Okay, all right. My wife calls me short story long instead of long story short, so sometimes I have to reel myself in, but it's great to be able to be myself. I make some little dinky videos on TikTok and Instagram to like educate people. I made a video or two videos about this. There's a patient that, I'll obviously protect the patient's privacy, but who's very dear to me, came to me as a second opinion. A person in their 40s who has end stage kidney disease, so is on dialysis, and through no fault of the patient's own, meaning that it was like an autoimmune condition that ended up destroying the kidneys. And then this, as part of the kidney transplant workup, so the patient was listed for a kidney transplant, you have to get the arteries of the heart checked out, because the surgeon wants to know if there are any significant blockages that will, risk decreased blood flow to the heart muscle during a 6-hour procedure that's very intensive. So he goes to another cardiologist, gets a heart catheterization, multiple blockages, but he gave consent just for the catheterization, not for stents, not to fix it. And also, I won't get in the weeds here because it'll take up the whole conversation and detract from the important stuff, but there was no indication to put the stents in. He wasn't symptomatic. And outside of a heart attack, you don't put in stents unless someone's symptomatic, like very active guy. But anyways, he ends up coming up to my office, and there's a healthcare provider in the family. A parent is there who's a nurse and knows what's going on, what's what. And so I'm meeting this individual. They're telling me the story that they walked away full metal jacket in at least two of the three main arteries, multiple stents. The problem with that is, after you get a stent, you have to be on two medications that increase your bleeding risk for at least a certain period of time, because those medications keep the stent open and stop you from having a heart attack. What ended up happening as a consequence was that non-consensual stents are put in. This patient gets delisted from the kidney transplant list because of the bleeding risk, because no surgeon wants to operate in a 6-hour procedure with a lot of blood vessels to work with when there's elevated bleeding risk. The kicker is, when the anesthesia wore off and he was talking to the other provider, was brushed away when he asked, like, why'd you put in stents? I didn't consent. But then he asked the most important question. He said, why did this happen to me? And that provider ended up saying, it's because of what you guys eat. This is a Black patient. And then when pressed even more, he said, like fried chicken. And there are two horrible things about this. One is obviously what I said. I don't think I have to characterize why that's horrible. The second thing is, he had end stage, or has end stage kidney disease. That by itself is more of a risk factor than diabetes for blockage in the arteries of the heart. Like, that's the answer. You don't have to go making up things and invoking your personal bias to answer that question. You can answer it easily with a nice, very logical explanation. There's a lot of that in the South. I don't think that's hard to believe or will be a surprise to anybody, but it's something that my wife sees a lot as well. Black maternal mortality is much higher than white maternal mortality. Black cardiac patients on average wait about 35 minutes longer than white patients when they have chest pain in the ER for an EKG, just a 2-minute procedure to get those little squigglies to see if you're having a heart attack. They're significantly less likely to get a kidney if they need a kidney. It really touches all aspects of medicine. So yeah, I'm working in an area that I think is very underserved and needs some education for patients so they can advocate for themselves.
And thank you for sharing that. Thank you for your honesty, because I've heard this a lot. I've read about it. I have close friends of mine that are doctors who I've also had personal conversations about this. So I know that this exists. And to have you on my podcast and for you to actually acknowledge it and share a story and some experience that you've had around this is very powerful. So I really do appreciate that. What can, as a doctor, as a cardiologist, what can we do? What can the people do to help get in front of this?
Yeah, that's a great question with a lot of answers. I think one of the things that we miss starting K through 12 education is that we don't really learn a lot about health. We inhabit our bodies from the time our eyes open to the time our eyes close for the final time, and we just don't know. And that's a shame. I can't fix that, but educating yourself in terms of listening to trusted doctors, whether it be on social media, what have you. So some of that's a little bit risky because you never know what what people are selling you online. But what I tell patients is verify. You can read a trial and not be an expert, but read the conclusion and get an idea and just get a kind of survey of the land. It takes some effort, but if you're going to a doctor and you want to have a good lifespan and a good quality of life, which are two very separate things. We live on average 78 years in the United States, but on average, the last 10 to 15 years of your life are dealing with chronic illness. No one wants to live that way. So we got to improve both. And things that you can do that are easy are, education. I can get into specifics about that, but also things like watching your sodium level. That's a large kind of contributor to high blood pressure. High blood pressure constitutes 47% of the risk of developing blockage in the arteries of the heart later in life. An example I can give is a close friend of mine, way back from high school, texted me a few months ago and was like, my blood pressure was 150s over 90s at his primary care provider's office. And that usually warrants 2 blood pressure medications. He got a blood pressure cuff from a pharmacy, like I told him to check it daily, at least once a day, which I would recommend that everyone do just to screen, because you go once a year to the doctor, that's one data point and there are 364 days left. So it doesn't really tell you whether you have high blood pressure or not. But what I told him when he got those same results on his home blood pressure readings was go to your pantry and look at the sodium and the percent daily value. And an example I give is if people eat sushi, soy sauce, 1 tablespoon, and I'm using more than 1 tablespoon when I eat sushi, 25% of your day's sodium. To use another example that's perhaps more approachable, if you take 2 hamburger buns with nothing in between, it's between 11 and 14% of your day's sodium. Hot sauce, 1 teaspoon, 4 to 11%, depending on the brand, and on and on and on. And so I told them, go through your pantry, basically eliminate the high levels, or at least be aware of what the serving size is so you can limit yourself. He ended up doing that, checked his blood pressure, and about a month, 2 months later, he tells me that he's been checking every day and it is stone cold normal. So you can save yourself from developing disease and also the cost of medications by lifestyle interventions, by watching what you eat sodium wise. And then things like activity. It's hard to do physical activity with desk jobs. I get it. But my mantra is always, don't shoot immediately for the 10,000 steps a day, which is not a magic number, but that's for another time. If you're sedentary, go to 2,000 steps a day and maintain that for 2 weeks and then increase as you can. Basically, a little bit more will still add value in terms of health as long as you can sustain it over a lifetime. And that's what I want patients to do, not completely overhaul their lives and then 6 months later they backslide. I want something that they can keep with, and some benefit is better than none.
Wow, thank you for that. Podcast family, I hope that you are listening to this. If you need to replay this episode, please do so. Take some notes because this is very important. And as Bilal has stated, there are simple things that you can do to help ensure good heart health, which also high blood pressure plays a key role, as Bilal has stated. So even making sure that your sodium levels are in check is important, going through your cabinets. I know, listen, I love hot sauce. Let me tell you something. My favorite is Frank's. I'm originally from Metro Detroit. Shout out. Although I live in the South and have been for over 20 years now. I like Frank's. And then I have my Mexican hot sauce as well. But as you have stated, Bilal, being mindful of what we use just on our foods. in itself and our foods. It's very important. The processed lunch meat, for an example, versus if you eat chicken versus buying chicken and cutting that up and putting that on a sandwich, it's huge
Absolutely.
difference. It can really help with your health. So thank you for that. So Bilal, I like to talk about your startup.
Yeah,
Tell me more
absolutely.
about that.
Yeah, so I gave the whole preamble about my passion being kind of addressing an inflammatory burden and kind of bridging that gap between what we predict will happen and how many people actually get heart disease. So in my mind, the most promising area in terms of targeting inflammation is the gut microbiome. So to give people maybe some new knowledge is that we are more bacteria than human. There are literally more bacterial cells in our body than human cells. And when you look at DNA contribution, the bacteria that live alongside us or inside us rather contribute 150 times the DNA that our human cells do. So it would be crazy to think that there's not some interaction that's going on. And I'll get a little bit deeper into it, but this field really took off in about 2013. There was this big trial in a very prestigious journal called the New England Journal of Medicine. There's an infection, a diarrheal infection that's really hard to treat, but with antibiotics called C. diff that you may have heard of, or some of the listeners may have heard of, but it's not uncommon. What they found was basically if you take someone who is healthy, you literally take their stool, you put it in a capsule, and you give it to someone who has failed antibiotic therapy and continues to suffer from C. diff infection, it's got a 95+% cure rate. And that got people wondering, what is it about that stool that's curing these people? And it turns out that the hypothesis was that it's the bacteria, the type of bacteria, and then what they make, and so on and so forth. And that prompted the National Institute of Health, or the NIH, to start this 10-year human microbiome project, which ended about 5 to 7 years ago, basically characterizing what a normal gut microbiome looks like and what an abnormal gut microbiome looks like. And then all the data that's been coming out in at least the medical field, because a lot of people think gut microbiome and they immediately think some sort of marketing like a supplement. Despite me being in the supplement space, my whole spiel is transparency or no bullshit ever. I'll show you all the data. You can read the trials that I got, all the formulation from, and I'll get into that later if we have time. But basically, from heart disease, which I'll get to in a second, to things like cancer. If you take two people who are identical, they have the exact same type of cancer that has a mutation or the same mutation, meaning they qualify for biologic therapy. It's like more targeted chemotherapy targeted towards the mutation in the cancer. The people with healthy gut microbiomes will respond much better to the biologic therapy in terms of regressing the cancer or taking it away altogether compared to people with unhealthy gut microbiomes. The same goes for cardiac disease. So, what is important to kind of know from a systems and what's happening in the body perspective is that fiber, for example, the human gut can't metabolize fiber. We rely on bacteria to do that for us. Certain aspects of cholesterol metabolism, bacteria or certain types of bacteria help us do that. Certain bacteria or types of bacteria actually make the bad cholesterol levels higher. And so all of that is to say is that I spent about a year doing additional research into formulating this back in 2023 because there was a gap between 2017 and 2023. It's a new field. A lot of science had come out. And I ended up narrowing it down to 79 scientific papers and formulated prebiotics, which is basically are bacteria that are beneficial for us in some way, and then postbiotics, which are basically the chemicals that those bacteria make after they digest the fiber. Those chemicals are called postbiotics. That they're what really do the health action. I formulated it specifically to do two things. One, decrease the bad cholesterol or the LDL that tends to aggregate in the blood vessel wall and actually cause the blockage and lead to heart attack. And then also decrease, kind of functional GI symptoms like IBS type symptoms that a lot of us deal with because of the types of foods that we eat. So I ended up using about 13 randomized control trials for the LDL aspect, showing that, this combination or these probiotics rather in the 15 to 21%, which is on par with some of the pharmaceuticals that I prescribe in clinic as a physician, bempedoic acid and ezetimibe for people who are in the know. with regard to medications. So really the kind of underlying theme or what drove me to this was the original passion about this whole concept. And then the desire to kind of help people reduce their risk on top of a healthy lifestyle. So I'm not going to tell you there's a silver bullet. No such thing exists in medicine. You have to eat a little healthier. You have to be a little bit more active. And this is truly a supplement to a healthy lifestyle. But I'd rather prevent disease and be more proactive than have you end up on my table at 3 a.m. needing an artery open, because some damage has been done even if it's a successful procedure. You know what I mean?
I love that you have this. In the podcast family, we're at a point in time where we have the technology now where you can literally go on your phone, whether you use Gemini, you can use Chat GPT. If you have Microsoft, you can use their version of AI, and you can literally type and ask it what foods are great for helping to lower cholesterol. If you don't know where to start, that's a great place to start. In addition, Bilal has these supplements that will aid that. So that will actually help in addition to you changing your lifestyle holistically. And how I see it is this: I understand, especially now, groceries are really expensive. It's better to be proactive than reactive. I would rather spend, money up front on groceries, purchasing healthier food items versus the bill that you'll receive from the hospital.
Amen.
That's how we have to look at it. I do want to go back here because I know the podcast family will have questions on probiotics. When you think about the gut, and I know that you hit on this, we usually think about probiotics, prebiotics, etc. Can you talk about where exactly the supplements you've created, where that falls?
Yeah, so it falls in a category called symbiotics, SYN. It's a relatively new term. It's not a particularly well-defined term, but it basically means you have all three biotics, or three of them: the prebiotics, the probiotics, and the postbiotics. Most people don't know about that third category, which is a shame because again, it's the chemical that the probiotics make when they eat the prebiotics. So basically, they're eating fiber, and that chemical is what does the health action. So what I tell people is my mantra, internal, external. It's always been my mantra kind of personally, but for the business as well, is no bullshit ever. That means a few things. It means it has to meet a certain level of data. So a lot of supplement companies, there are some good ones out there. I'm not going to say every supplement company, but mine is bad. That would be kind of, you know, wouldn't be very original of me and would be very salesy, and also would not be true. But if you look at a lot of other companies, they will say that they're science backed. And you look on Google, you look on PubMed, which is kind of the Google for medical studies, and you find nothing but links back to their PR campaigns. Or if you find a study, it's a study that's conducted in rats or mice, and they're completely different species. You cannot extrapolate what you find in another species to humans. You have to do the due diligence of studying it in humans. Very few companies have in-human trials. So the bar that I set, kind of that no bullshit ever, is that I'm going to apply the same lens of critical appraisal of literature from medicine to entrepreneurship. So my bar was it has to be a randomized controlled trial, meaning an in-human trial where you test prospectively against something else. And then also part of that umbrella of no bullshit ever is transparency. If I hide the data and tell you that it's data backed, a reasonable person is going to be like, well, show me the data. And when it comes to that on the website, for example, or on my website, the data is there. It's linked to the paper. There are blogs that are written by me, myself, and I. No AI guidance, no ghostwriter. Every fact or claim that I make is hyperlinked to the original study and back to people not needing to be experts in studies to be able to get the gist of it. It's there so that people can independently verify what I'm saying, so that you have the receipts and it's not just me telling you, hey, trust me, I'm a doctor. Because there are Dr. Oz's and then there are actual doctors, right? So I kind of position myself as the anti-Dr. Oz. And then people will ask me sometimes or email me that, hey, I want to see all the data. And I've got to Google drive folder with all 79 papers that I used to formulate it. And I just share the drive because I have nothing to hide, for example. It basically, it is what it is. And that's kind of the approach that I've taken with this company. And my hope and my strong feeling is that at the end of the day, ethics will win. Marketing will favor the people who go with a lower margin business that kind of skims off the top. They may win initially, but long-term customers and patients and people are savvy and they can sniff out the bullshit. And so if you can build that trust and credibility over time, you'll win at the end of the day in the long run.
That's awesome. Where can the podcast family and first time listeners, anyone who's listening right now, where can we find more information and about this and where can we purchase?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now we're selling directly from our website. It's lylahhealth.com. That has the blogs. It has a section called case studies, which has some of the higher or kind of the big papers that I wanted to highlight. Feel free to email me at bilal@lylahhealth.com. If you want to see all the papers, I'd be happy to share them with you and anyone. But that's where you can purchase directly through there. It's a Shopify link. And then we're hoping to be on Amazon in the coming months.
That's awesome. Podcast family, you know how I do it. I'm going to have all of the information that Bilal has presented in the description of this episode. So the website will be there as well as his email address. That will be there as well. It's really important that you listen to this episode, that you receive the information that Bilal has shared with you. I mean, his expertise, he's a cardiologist and he studies the heart. So if you have a history, family history of heart issues, if you are struggling with high blood pressure, cholesterol, any of those things, all of that attributes to heart health, please listen to this episode. Please receive what Bilal has shared with you, and please check out his website. As I stated earlier in this episode, personally, heart issues, it runs in my family. When I tell you this, I mean, found out my great grandfather on my paternal side passed away from congestive heart. My paternal grandmother passed away of congestive heart. Out of 6 of her kids, 3 of them had congestive heart, where one of them had to get a heart transplant. He has since transitioned on. May he rest in peace. My favorite aunt, she was too weak to receive a heart. So they said she wouldn't make it, so she wasn't able to be put on the list. She passed away back in 2015. Her name was Brenda Garcia. I loved her. She was my favorite aunt on that side. And then my father has congestive heart. In addition to that, I have first cousins on that side who also have heart issues, all genetic. So I have spent on my own since I was aware when it first happened with my father a few decades ago. I spent a lot of time personally just doing my own research. And I love the fact, Bilal, that you have stated your no BS, because everything that you have stated, like I've learned new things today as well, but it's been in direct alignment with a lot of research that I have undertaken on my own, because I personally understand about how cholesterol plays a part, how high blood pressure plays a part. I've learned how potassium plays a part. I learned about how the things we eat, how that plays a role. So, podcast family, we have a guest on here that has been fully transparent and has shared some great information with you for free. He shared this information for free. So please, I know personally I will be purchasing, checking out his supplements, and I'm also going to share it with my family members, with my cousins, because again, this runs in the family. I'd rather be proactive than reactive. Bilal, I know you said you are in Columbus, Georgia. Are you accepting new patients?
I am, absolutely. And my expertise again is, I do general cardiology, but I also, my specialty is blockages in the arteries, the heart, and valve disease. So particularly if you have those and you're in the area and this resonated with you, I am accepting new patients and would be happy to see you. And thanks for the very, very kind summary. One thing that I'd add on to that in terms of transparency is what I tell potential customers or people that I interact with is you don't have to take my word or the data's word for it. Get a cholesterol panel before you start Lylah if you choose to do so. And then 3 months later, get a repeat one. That LDL, unless you start eating 3 cheeseburgers a day, drastically alter your lifestyle, that LDL will be down. So the proof will be there.
That's great to hear. That is great to hear because, like I said, I'm excited about it. I do panels twice a year personally. Like I said, I believe in being proactive versus reactive. Podcast family, for the family that is in the Columbus, Georgia area, please look for Dr. Bilal Ahmed as you're searching for cardiologist. Please request him because he is a doctor that actually cares. And if you have been through anything, include whether it's with a loved one or even having to advocate for yourself as a person of color, as a Black Mexican woman, and as Black Americans, we know how difficult it can be. It's such a rarity to find a doctor who will actually listen and who will actually care about us. So that's why I'm really standing 10 toes down on this when I say, please make sure you check out Dr. Bilal Ahmed. Look for him in Columbus, Georgia, if you are in need of a cardiologist, because he is one that will take the time with you, that will explain things to you, that will answer your questions without just running off, and who actually cares about how you're treated.
I hope you all don't need it, but I'm on call this weekend. So if you have any issues, I'll be there.
Awesome. Well, Bilal, thank you again for just agreeing to come on to Mama Mabel's Caregivers podcast and for sharing the wealth of knowledge and information and wisdom that you have with the podcast family. I sincerely appreciate it. I know that the podcast family will sincerely appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's the bare minimum of our jobs, and thanks for giving me a platform and having a wonderful dialogue with me.
Thank you. Podcast family, until next time.